Alright, so in this slide you see some important figures of modern economics. To the very left you see Adam Smith, and he lived from 1723 to 1790, and at the time of his working he was actually a moral philosopher. He was not an economist yet. Later generations made him an economist. And what was his moral philosophy? Well, his moral philosophy was that private property and competition are morally superior to church doctrines. So Adam Smith is a prominent figure of the period of Enlightenment. And the period of Enlightenment was replacing the Dark Ages, and during the Dark Ages the Catholic Church in particular was a very important player in shaping public life. And essentially the Catholic Church held that when people own private property, then that can be good to the development of Christian virtues like modesty, humbleness, prudence, fortitude, and other Christian virtues. And the Catholic Church basically believed that private property corrupts people. And then Adam Smith came along and said, you know what, let's just assume people do have private property, but they compete with each other. Then isn't it the case that those companies that are the nicest to their workers, that are the smartest in planning, that have the most prudence, that are the most modest and humble, then wouldn't it be those companies that ultimately succeed in competition? So the moral philosophy of Adam Smith was that competition based on private property and economic competition can actually bring out those Christian virtues out of each individual much more effectively than church doctrines. So that's why he became an economist, because he eventually discovered that economics based on competition is not only efficient to allocate scarce resources efficiently, but it is also a virtuous arrangement in society. But when Adam Smith worked, he was basically writing books, and there were no graphs in there. And the person in the middle, who is Alfred Marshall, he lived from 1842 to 1924, he essentially turned that classical Smithsonian economics into modern science, describing economic relationships in models and mathematical formulas. So you will see some of the work that Alfred Marshall has introduced. And again, why is he important? Yeah, he is important because he succeeded in creating an analytical framework that is open to mathematical formulations, graphical formulations, in order to prove or to show or to hypothesize that what Adam Smith already felt without using math and formulas can actually be nicely formulated in technical terms. And that was the major contribution of Alfred Marshall. And both Adam Smith and Alfred Marshall, they can be both considered to be more of microeconomists. Much of the work is what we will teach today in classes of microeconomics. And the person to the right, that is John Maynard Keynes, and he lived from 1883 to 1946, and he is the father of modern economics. Modern macroeconomics. So he's the father of modern macroeconomics, and he basically or his star rose during the Great Depression or after the stock market crash, when the economy in the US fell into a major recession in 1929, after the so-called Black Friday, and he suddenly came along and basically said, sometimes markets, they can fail, and there may be recessions or business cycles that are more or less natural, others maybe are less natural, but we have to assume that economic development and economic growth is not a continuous, steady, uphill climb, but there are ups and downs. And those ups and downs, they happen in the short run. There may be, it could be a natural disaster that affects an economy. It could be a structural issue like a banking crisis, a currency crisis, or something along these lines. But in the short run, economies, they may fall into recession, and in such cases, a government can smooth out such business cycles or fluctuations. And for that purpose, the government needs to become a proactive player in an economy and basically stabilize the economy. In the United States, if you go back to your history classes, that Keynesian recommendation was essentially implemented by Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. So now, after the stock market crash in 1929, when we entered the 1930s, the Great Depression, the New Deal was intended to stimulate aggregate demand and provide again for more employment opportunities and create again income, create again jobs. And according to Keynes, this should only happen in the short run. And on an earlier slide, I said micro is the long run, macro is the short run. And now, if you see a little bit, maybe the context of the aftermath of the stock market crash, when lots of people were unemployed, Keynes essentially said, let's not wait for things to straighten them out by themselves, but let's let the government assume a proactive role and stabilize the economy in the short run. So that was his major contribution, and he also did that in a rather technical way by introducing new concepts into economics. But those three people you should know at least, and of course there are many others that you should know, but let's just leave it with those three for now.